Does the soul truly exist? If it does, where is it? Is it inside your brain, or beyond the body? And what about when we die? That consciousness we call me, will it vanish forever? Or could it live on, in another form, on another plane? Humanity has been chasing this question for thousands of years. Philosophers, scientists, mystics, have all wondered, is the human being merely flesh and bone, or is there an unseen essence, a soul? In this documentary, we'll examine this mystery through the lens of neuroscience, quantum physics, cosmology, and philosophy. Is the soul merely a belief, or a reality we have yet to fully understand? We'll explore the latest scientific findings and deep debates to investigate whether a self beyond the body, an immortal soul, can exist. If you're ready, we begin a journey that pushes the scientific and philosophical boundaries of what it means to have a soul. Neuroscience, the secrets of the brain and consciousness. Modern neuroscience attempts to unlock the mystery of the soul by looking at the center of our mind, the brain. The human brain is an astonishing network of about 86 billion neurons. Between them lie trillions of connections. Like a cosmic-scale communication grid, it's through this network that we think and feel. Our prefrontal cortex governs decision-making, while the amygdala processes emotions. Every mental experience has a neural counterpart. How does the physical brain create subjective conscious experience? Philosopher David Chalmers calls this the hard problem of consciousness. If we are merely flesh and electricity, where does our sense of I come from? Scientists have conducted fascinating experiments to answer this. For instance, split brain studies strikingly reveal the link between brain and consciousness. In patients whose corpus callosum, the bridge between the brain's hemispheres, is severed to treat epilepsy, it's as if two separate minds emerge in one body. Some patients could name objects in one hand while drawing something entirely different with the other. One patient's left hand, controlled by the right brain, tried to remove his shirt, while the right hand tried to stop it. It was as if one side of the brain disapproved of the other's actions. These experiments highlight how deeply consciousness is tied to brain structure. In a being with one soul, how can consciousness be split in two? This raises the possibility that the soul might be a phenomenon produced by the brain. Some theories focus on the brain's role in generating consciousness. Global workspace theory and integrated information theory propose that consciousness emerges from the integration of data within the brain's large-scale networks. In other words, complex interactions between brain cells create what we call awareness. Indeed, brain imaging studies show synchronized activity in different regions during conscious experiences. According to this view, consciousness, and possibly what we call the soul, is an information field created within the brain. However, a minority of scientists explore an alternative. Instead of the brain as a producer, they see it as a receiver. According to this model, the brain might not generate consciousness but instead receive or filter it, like a radio that doesn't produce music, but tunes into it. In this view, the mind could be receiving signals from a greater reality beyond itself. If so, then consciousness or soul may exist outside the brain, perhaps in the depths of space or quantum fields. This idea is speculative and hard to prove, yet it offers an inspiring rethinking of the soul through modern physics. Could consciousness be a fundamental entity embedded within space-time itself? Neuroscience also faces the challenge of mind uploading. If consciousness arises entirely from neural circuits, could we theoretically copy all those patterns and upload them into a computer? This concept promises digital immortality by replicating the human mind digitally. Futurists argue that with enough processing power, every detail of the brain could be simulated, and consciousness transferred into a machine. But strong criticisms remain. Even if uploading succeeded, the result might not truly be you, just a copy. While your biological self dies, a digital twin might continue living. This raises philosophical questions about soul and self. Can a soul be copied? If the soul is just information, and information can be duplicated, which copy holds the real you? Though mind uploading hasn't provided a definitive answer about how material-dependent consciousness is, it forces us to reflect on the physical foundations of identity, and deepens the mystery of the soul. Ultimately, neuroscience shows a very strong link between brain and consciousness. When the roughly 1.4 kilogram gray matter inside our skull is damaged, our mind is damaged, and our personality can shift. For example, there are known cases where individuals began committing crimes due to brain tumors, or experienced complete personality changes after accidents. These cases suggest that what we call mind or soul is, at the very least, tightly bound to this physical organ. Still, the equation consciousness equals brain doesn't fully satisfy us. Big questions remain unanswered. Why did consciousness evolve? Why does it emerge only in complex neural networks? And what becomes of consciousness at the moment of death? While scientists examine these questions in laboratories, our next stop will be another dimension of the self and mind: psychology. Psychology, the construction of self and identity. Now, let's look through the lens of psychology. What allows us to experience ourselves as a self? Personality and self-awareness develop in childhood and are shaped throughout life. Our environment, memories, and the brain's chemical balance are all components that define who we are. As infants, humans don't recognize their own reflection, but around age 2, they pass the mirror test and begin to grasp their own existence. The seed of self-awareness begins to sprout. Over time, we accumulate memories, develop values and beliefs, all of which form our identity. Freud introduced the concept of the subconscious by comparing the mind to an iceberg filled with deep drives that never surface. Jung, on the other hand, proposed a collective unconscious shared by all humanity. Both emphasize the vast depths beneath the visible layers of the human mind, suggesting that what we call soul might lie within these mental depths. However, even Freud and Jung's concepts are ultimately grounded in brain function. They provide metaphorical definitions of the soul but no concrete proof. One of the most fascinating findings in psychology is how fragile and flexible our sense of self can be. Sometimes, a traumatic accident or illness can wipe away our memories and disconnect us from our past identity. Some patients with amnesia lose their old memories and seem to be reborn with no recollection of who they once were. The loss of memory reveals just how deeply our identity is tied to our memory. Even in daily life, when we're extremely tired or under intense stress, we might feel strange to ourselves, as if our soul has momentarily drifted away from our body. These experiences show just how unstable our sense of self can be. One of the most striking examples is dissociative identity disorder, formerly known as multiple personality disorder. In this condition, multiple personalities, or alters, exist within one body. A single person might house two distinct identities, such as Alice and Barbara, each with its own memories and behaviors, appearing at different times. When one personality is present, it has no knowledge of what the other has done. What's more, scientists have found that these alter identities can even differ physiologically. There are reports of one alter having allergies while another does not, or one needing glasses while the other sees perfectly fine. A 1990 study found that 8 out of 9 patients with dissociative identity disorder displayed unique autonomic nervous system responses for each alter, such as heart rate, blood pressure, and skin conductance. In other words, it's the same body, but the soul appears fragmented, with each fragment leaving its own physical trace. This raises a profound question. If we have a single soul, can it truly be divided? Or was it perhaps composed of many parts to begin with? Of course, dissociative disorders are explained as defense mechanisms of the brain. The mind splits the self in response to intense trauma during childhood. Still, the fact that psychological unity can fracture forces us to reconsider the soul. Is the soul a singular, indivisible essence, or is it simply the various states of what we call the mind? Other experiments in psychology also reveal strange aspects of self-perception. Illusions like the mirror box experiment or the rubber hand illusion can trick people into sensing incorrect body perceptions. In virtual reality experiments, people can feel as if they've entered a virtual body within minutes. Some even report out-of-body-like experiences. By misleading the brain sensory map, it's possible to make someone feel as if they've left their body. These controlled experiments show that some spiritual experiences may actually be generated by the brain. All of this reveals the neuropsychological foundations of our sense of self, not to confirm the classical idea of a soul, but to highlight the mind's adaptability. Humans construct their identity through memories and perceptions in the brain. If our memory is damaged, it feels as though our soul is wounded. If our identity is split, is our soul also divided, or does each identity require its own soul? Psychology attempts to explain the soul through physical and mental processes. Freud's subconscious and Jung's archetypes are, in essence, scientific translations of the stories humans have told about the soul for thousands of years. In the end, the truth psychology whispers to us is this: what we call self is a delicate structure. Our memories, our personalities, even our deepest beliefs, all can be shaken. And if we do have a soul, then it must carry deep imprints from our experiences, our brain, and our environment. Perhaps what we call the soul is a narrative of the self produced by the brain. A story that is magnificent, meaningful, and fragile. Consciousness at the edge of death. Now we stand at the sharpest boundary, consciousness at the intersection of life and death. From a medical perspective, the concept of the soul is often tested against the concept of brain death. Clinically, a person is considered dead the moment brain activity irreversibly ceases. The heart can stop and the brain may still function for a while, but once the brain goes silent, consciousness is thought to end as well. But is that really the absolute end? Cases of people awakening from comas or borderline states have always fascinated the medical world. Patients who spent years in comas and later regained awareness have forced us to redefine what we mean by consciousness. Some patients in comas appear entirely unconscious, yet their brains can still show slight responses to external stimuli. This condition is called a minimally conscious state. And in locked-in syndrome, a person may be fully paralyzed and unable to respond, yet still mentally alert and aware. The body becomes a prison, the soul struggles within, unseen by the outside world. These examples show that the line between body and consciousness isn't always clear, and medicine is still progressing in its understanding of awareness. But the most thrilling and controversial topic is near-death experiences and findings related to consciousness after cardiac arrest. Some individuals who were declared clinically dead after their hearts stopped have come back and described what they experienced during that time. A tunnel with light at the end, an out-of-body view of their own body, a life review flashing like a movie reel. These accounts have been reported again and again. Scientists have long studied this phenomenon. Can consciousness persist briefly after the heart and brain have stopped? The AWARE study, published in 2014, was groundbreaking in this area. Led by Dr. Sam Parnia, this research examined hundreds of patients who had experienced cardiac arrest and were revived via CPR. It found that around 10% had classic near-death experiences, and about 2% reported feeling as though they had left their bodies and observed the scene around them. In one case, a patient accurately described the sound of a machine and conversations that occurred while they were unconscious, even though their heart had stopped and their brain had been deprived of oxygen. How was that possible? Critics argue that these memories were formed not at the moment of death, but during the process of revival, or that the brain, in its final moments, created a dreamlike narrative that felt real. But Parnia's research also included EEG data, showing that some brain activity can persist briefly even after flatlining. A more recent study published in 2023 recorded short spikes in brain waves, including high-frequency gamma activity, even up to an hour after cardiac arrest. Gamma waves are typically associated with conscious thought, so the brain may give up later than expected, perhaps trying to preserve consciousness for a final moment. People who undergo near-death experiences often describe similar sensations. A feeling of peace, moving toward a bright light, seeing deceased loved ones or spiritual figures, or viewing themselves from above. Science takes these accounts seriously, but cautiously. One explanation is hypoxia, lack of oxygen causing hallucinations in the brain. As oxygen levels drop, the visual cortex may shut down in a way that creates tunnel-like visions. Light may appear to move from the center of the field outward. A surge of neurotransmitters like serotonin can create overwhelming feelings of joy and peace. In fact, a 2018 study on rats found that, at the moment of death, the brain released a powerful psychedelic chemical called DMT, which could also explain these vivid visions. Yet there remain aspects of near-death experiences that biology struggles to fully explain. Some patients have recalled conversations or events that took place even after their hearts had stopped, or claimed to know things that occurred outside the room. Could this mean consciousness becomes independent from the body? Such claims are hard to verify. In the AWARE study, hidden images were placed in operating rooms to test for out-of-body experiences. But none of the patients were later able to describe these images. So no direct proof of leaving the body was obtained. Medicine stands at a crossroads. On one side, the traditional view says, when the brain stops, consciousness ends. On the other, emerging data suggests, maybe consciousness lingers a bit longer. In 2022, Parnia's AWARE 2 study found that around 20% of people revived after cardiac arrest reported some level of awareness. possibly due to a disinhibition effect, where the brain's usual suppression mechanisms are lifted during the dying process. Perhaps as the brain dies, some normally closed doors open, and we interpret this as a mystical experience. Medically speaking, no near-death experience has yet provided conclusive evidence of an immortal soul. However, these experiences deeply change people's lives. Their fear of death diminishes, their perspective on life deepens, and many come away saying, "I'm now a spiritual being." Striving to live more meaningfully. Even if near-death experiences aren't objectively real, their psychological effects are undeniably real and lasting. Which raises a question. If the brain is playing this final trick on us during death, why? Is there an evolutionary reason, or is it just a byproduct of a process we don't yet understand? In the future, with more sensitive instruments to monitor brain activity, medicine may be able to track consciousness moment by moment at the time of death. When that day comes, we may finally get clearer answers to whether the soul truly leaves the body. For now, what we know is this. Consciousness at the threshold of death is real, but how we interpret it remains uncertain. And this uncertainty leads us to the next stop in the search for the soul. The most fundamental level of reality, quantum physics. Quantum physics, the mystery of consciousness and matter. When we examine matter at its smallest scales, reality behaves in ways that are radically different from our everyday experience. Quantum physics tells us that particles in the subatomic world can exist in multiple states simultaneously, until they are observed, at which point they collapse into a single state. These oddities have inspired bold ideas about the nature of consciousness. Could there be a quantum-level link between mind and matter? One of the most well-known proposals is the Orch OR theory, short for orchestrated objective reduction, developed by Nobel Prize-winning physicist Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff. They propose that consciousness doesn't arise from classical computer-like neural networks, but from quantum processes within neurons. Hameroff believes that microscopic tubular structures within our cells, called microtubules, are not just part of the cell skeleton, but act like quantum computers. Inside the brain, billions of microtubules are arranged within neurons in crystal-like structures. According to Hameroff's hypothesis, these structures can exist in a quantum superposition, being in multiple potential states at once, and can store and process quantum information. Penrose connects the interface between quantum mechanics and consciousness to gravitational fluctuations and collapses in the geometry of spacetime. The Orch OR theory claims that quantum states in brain microtubules undergo objective collapse, triggered by gravity, once a certain threshold is reached, and each collapse creates a moment of conscious experience. It's as if each moment of our mind is linked to a quantum event in the universe. A radical and provocative claim. But is there any evidence? For years, the scientific community was skeptical, arguing that the brain, a warm, wet, and noisy environment at 37 degrees Celsius, is inhospitable to quantum superpositions. Such states typically collapse instantly in these conditions. It was thought impossible for microtubules to carry quantum information. But in recent years, intriguing experiments have begun to emerge. In 2013, researchers reported observing quantum vibrations and coherent oscillations in the structure of microtubules. Even more surprisingly, in a 2020s experiment, scientists shone lasers on microtubules and observed a phenomenon called quantum superradiance, an extended coordinated release of energy among molecules. This suggested that even in the brain's environment, microtubules might exhibit unusual quantum behaviors. And in 2022, a team at Wellesley College gave microtubule stabilizing drugs to anesthetized mice and found that those with intact microtubules lost consciousness more slowly. In other words, altering microtubules appeared to delay the onset of unconsciousness. This was presented as one of the first experimental clues that microtubules may play a role in consciousness. All of this is exciting, yet the idea of quantum consciousness remains far from mainstream acceptance. Most neuroscientists argue that there's no need for quantum leaps to explain consciousness. Classical neural network theories are sufficient. Still, the work of Penrose and Hameroff has popularized the idea that consciousness might be connected to fundamental features of the universe. From their perspective, if consciousness is a quantum phenomenon, then perhaps at the moment of classical death, information related to consciousness may not be lost. Hameroff has even speculated that near-death experiences might be the result of quantum superpositions leaving the body. He suggests that a dying brain might leak quantum information into the universe. Of course, this is an unproven idea, but an intriguing one. Let's recall the quantum principle that information cannot be destroyed. This was central to the famous black hole information paradox, debated by Stephen Hawking. If the mind contains quantum information, then perhaps the data of our soul is somehow retained in the universe. Some scientists, like physicist Sabine Hossenfelder, have even remarked, if we trust the math, we're immortal. Implying that if information cannot be destroyed, a being could, in principle, be reconstructed. Of course, that's more a philosophical inference than a scientific fact. But at the edges of science, we often encounter such bold ideas. Perhaps the deepest suggestion quantum physics offers is this: consciousness may be an inseparable part of the universe. Nobel laureate physicist Erwin Schrödinger once said the idea of a singular individual mind is an illusion. Minds are not many but one. Meaning, we may all be fragments of the same universal consciousness. This view aligns with the philosophical position of panpsychism, the idea that everything in the universe possesses some degree of consciousness. That consciousness is a fundamental property of reality. Some describe this playfully as tiny souls, existing from atoms to galaxies. In the early 20th century, philosopher Teilhard de Chardin spoke of the omega point, the ultimate convergence of all consciousness at the end of evolution, bringing human thought into cosmic dimensions. Of course, these are speculative ideas, not scientifically testable claims. But they show that in the relationship between mind and matter, quantum physics may offer a foundation far stranger, and potentially more hospitable to consciousness, than classical physics. So where do we currently stand? Even scientists as respected as Penrose take quantum consciousness seriously, but mainstream science remains unconvinced. Quantum physics has not proven the soul's immortality, and many believe it's unrelated. Yet we should leave the door open. If someday consciousness is shown to have a quantum basis, then we may come to understand how the mind, and possibly the soul, can exist independently of classical matter. For now, the quantum world has not given us a definitive answer. Which leads us to broaden our view one step further. Does the soul have a cosmic dimension? Universal consciousness and the cosmic dimension of the soul. When we lift our heads to the sky, we see an endless universe. But is this magnificent universe unaware of the tiny bodies that carry our consciousness within? Or is our consciousness a fundamental part of the cosmos itself? Cosmology and physics do not answer this question directly, but they offer clues. Let's make a comparison. The human brain is a network of billions of neurons, and the universe is a network of billions of galaxies. In fact, scientists have noticed that the web-like structure of galactic superclusters resembles the networks of neurons in the brain. It might just be an aesthetic similarity, but the idea of a harmony between our inner structure and the outer structure has always been compelling. In the 5th century BCE, Anaxagoras was one of the first philosophers to propose the idea of a cosmic mind, the nous. According to him, a universal intelligence was what brought order to chaos in the universe. Centuries later, the Stoics spoke of a divine reason, logos, that permeated the cosmos. These ancient ideas, in some ways, echo modern physics. Today, some theorists claim that at the foundation of the universe lies information. Physicist John Wheeler famously said it from bit, suggesting that everything, even matter, is rooted in information. If information is the universe's foundation, and the mind is an information processing system, could the universe itself possess some form of consciousness? Of course, we can't claim that a galaxy can think, or that the entire universe has a mind. We can't test that scientifically. But ideas like panpsychism propose that consciousness is a universal field. From this perspective, the soul isn't unique to humans. It's a quality present in the structure of all things in nature. This doesn't mean rocks and trees have souls like ours, but rather that beyond the material world, there might be a trace of experience, even at the most primitive levels of existence. In modern philosophy of mind, there's a concept called Galileo's error. To develop science, Galileo focused only on measurable qualities of nature, leaving out subjective experience. As a result, physics flourished, but consciousness was left out of the equation. Panpsychists argue that in order to account for consciousness or the soul, we must find a place for it in the universe. They say consciousness cannot arise from nothing, it must have always been there. That's why they argue even an electron might possess a tiny spark of inner experience. However bizarre that may sound. This notion is mirrored in physicist David Bohm's idea of the implicate order. According to Bohm, at a deeper level, everything in the universe is interconnected, and perhaps consciousness and matter are just two reflections of the same whole. In modern cosmology, there's not much direct research into the soul, but thinking about entropy and information offers an interesting angle. According to the second law of thermodynamics, entropy, or disorder, always increases. Systems use energy to maintain order, but in the end, all things break down. Life and consciousness are highly ordered systems that resist entropy. But at death, the body succumbs to entropy. So what happens to the information? Quantum physics implies that information can't be completely destroyed. Perhaps it transforms into another form. In Stephen Hawking's black hole research, this became a major paradox. Eventually, most physicists agreed, information shouldn't be lost. So let's imagine something radical. If the total information in the human brain leaves a trace in the universe, could a person's spiritual information remain preserved? No one can answer that question experimentally, yet. But as Sabine Hossenfelder has suggested, perhaps one day a super-advanced civilization could collect the data of every particle in the universe and reconstruct the consciousness of someone from the past. Like you or me. That sounds like science fiction, doesn't it? Another idea on the cosmic scale involves multiverses and the concept of quantum immortality. According to the many worlds interpretation of quantum theory, every possible outcome happens, but in different universes. In this framework, the quantum immortality paradox is discussed. Let's say you're in a life or death scenario with a 50% chance of survival. In one universe, you die, but in a parallel universe, you live. And no matter what you do, there will always be a branch where you survive. This idea isn't testable, and most physicists don't take it seriously. But it does raise fascinating philosophical questions. In one branch, could you ever experience your own death? So where does the soul fit in all this? If there are infinite universes, maybe our consciousness keeps flowing somewhere in the sea of possibilities. But again, this is more of a theoretical thought experiment. In summary, cosmology and fundamental physics are far from offering any proof of the soul's universality. Still, the idea of situating consciousness within a cosmic framework is being discussed more and more. Perhaps in the future, new discoveries will link consciousness with space-time. For now, we can say this. As humanity explores the cosmos, it's also trying to place its own existence within that cosmic scale. The question of whether our soul transcends our mortal body continues to live on, in both scientific research and philosophical reflection. And this brings us to our final destination, philosophy. For thousands of years, great minds have either defended or denied the soul's immortality. Let's now explore how their arguments still shed light on our world today. The historical and philosophical journey of the soul. As humanity has sought to make sense of the soul, philosophy became its oldest refuge. From ancient Greece to the modern age, philosophers have debated the nature of the soul. Let's begin with Socrates. Though he left no written works himself, his student Plato recorded his ideas in dialogues. In Phaedo, Plato presents Socrates attempting to prove the soul's immortality before his execution. One of his arguments is this: the soul by its very essence carries life, and since death is the opposite of life, the soul cannot accept death, therefore it is immortal. Plato generally viewed the soul as a true essence imprisoned in the body. According to him, the soul has three parts: reason, logic, spirit, will, and appetite, desire. Ideally, reason, like a charioteer, should guide the other parts. This tripartite model appears even in Plato's vision of the ideal state. Most importantly, Plato believed the soul could exist independently of the body and would return to the realm of forms after death. He even spoke of reincarnation, the idea that the soul is born into different bodies over time, as told in his famous myth of air. In Plato's view, the soul is immortal, separable from the body, and the purpose of philosophy is to liberate the soul from the chains of bodily desire. Aristotle, Plato's student, took a different approach. He defined the soul as the inseparable form of the body. In On the Soul, Aristotle described the soul as the vital principle distinguishing living beings from the non-living. A plant's soul is its capacity for growth and nourishment. An animal's soul adds sensation and movement. A human soul includes reasoning and intellect. For Aristotle, The soul is not a substance, not something physical like the body, but rather the principle behind the body's functions. He used the analogy, an axe is an axe because it can cut, that cutting ability is like its soul. The soul is the sum of an organism's functions. This means the soul cannot exist without the body. If the soul is the body's form, then when the body is gone, the form disappears as well. Yet Aristotle privileged the rational part of the human soul and implied that it might be universal. Some interpret this as him not believing in personal immortality, but entertaining the possibility that the active intellect could be immortal. Ultimately, Aristotle rejected the Platonic idea of a separate soul, offering a more embodied conception, one that aligned more closely with later scientific thinking. In the Hellenistic era, philosophers like Epicurus and Democritus argued that the soul was material. Democritus, a founder of atomic theory, claimed that the soul, like everything else, is made of atoms. He believed the soul consisted of very fine, fast-moving atoms, fire atoms. At death, when these atoms leave and disperse, the soul ceases to exist. Thus, the soul is mortal. Contrary to most ancient Greeks, Democritus rejected soul immortality and took a strictly materialist stance. Both body and soul are atoms, and after death, the atoms remain, but you are gone. Similarly, Epicurus stated, "When I am, death is not. When death is, I am not," emphasizing that the soul has no existence separate from the body. These ideas directly challenged religious and mystical beliefs. Later, Neoplatonists like Plotinus and medieval thinkers revived the idea of soul immortality. In Christian theology, Thomas Aquinas attempted to reconcile Aristotle's view of the soul with Christian doctrine. He interpreted the soul as the form of the body, but believed, by God's grace, it could exist without the body. By the 17th century, René Descartes entered the philosophical stage and redefined the mind-body duality. With his famous "I think, therefore I am," Descartes placed the thinking subject at the center. To him, mind and matter were completely different substances. The mind was a non-extended thinking substance. The body an extended, non-thinking one. Human beings were the union of these two. In Descartes' famous dualism, soul equals mind, and that soul is immortal, with an existence apart from the body. The only problem was how the mind interacts with the body. Descartes suggested the pineal gland was the interface, a theory mocked even in his own time. Still, Cartesian dualism clearly defined the body-soul divide and laid the groundwork for modern debates. After Descartes, many philosophers either supported or opposed the soul in light of his model. Baruch Spinoza, Descartes' contemporary, took a completely different path. He believed in a single substance, God or nature, and claimed that mind and body are two attributes of this one infinite reality. For Spinoza, the soul and body are two aspects of the same entity and cannot be separated. Thus, he denied personal soul immortality and asserted that the individual mind ends with the body. However, Spinoza also claimed that part of the mind is eternal. He wasn't referring to our personal memories or awareness, but to the idea that our mind is one with God/nature. It may sound paradoxical. Spinoza was excommunicated for denying soul immortality, branded heretical for this view throughout his life. In his pantheistic philosophy, the individual soul does not endure, but from the perspective of universal nature, the mind reflects something eternal. With the Enlightenment, critical views of the soul increased. David Hume argued that the self is merely a bundle of perceptions, that there is no unchanging essence beneath them. In his famous analogy, the mind is a theater, but with no soul behind the scenes. Immanuel Kant added a new dimension to the debate. He stated that theoretical reason cannot prove the soul's immortality. It lies outside the realm of experience. However, in his moral philosophy, practical reason demands that we assume the soul's immortality. Kant argued that we aim for infinite moral progress, which only makes sense if we have an immortal soul. Likewise, true justice requires the existence of God and an immortal soul. This was not necessarily Kant's personal belief, but a condition within his moral framework. He did not claim to prove or deny the soul's existence. He called it unknowable, but argued that we must assume it morally. The 19th and 20th centuries saw the soul concept retreat in the face of science. Materialism gained ground. There is no separate substance called soul, and mental events are the product of the brain. Philosophers like Marx saw soul belief as part of ideological superstructure. Freud replaced the soul with unconscious psychological processes. Gilbert Ryle mocked Cartesian dualism with his phrase "the ghost in the machine," likening belief in a soul to imagining a ghost inside a mechanical body. Modern thinkers like Daniel Dennett argue that we don't need the soul to explain consciousness, that it may be an illusion produced by complex neural processes. In Consciousness Explained, Dennett proposed that even subjective experience can be fully accounted for by brain activity, leaving no mystery soul behind. Of course, this hasn't ended philosophical debate. For many, the idea that consciousness is an illusion is deeply unsatisfying. This bird's-eye view of philosophical history shows us this. The idea of an immortal soul has held great appeal, and faced fierce criticism. In the tradition of Plato and Descartes, the soul is an immortal essence that transcends the body. In the tradition of Aristotle and Spinoza, the soul cannot be separated from the body, and thus dies with it. Thinkers like Kant take a middle path. We cannot know if the soul exists, but believing in it has moral value. Today, dominant philosophical trends defer to neuroscience. But in the philosophy of mind, the hard problem remains. Why and how are we conscious? As long as that question remains unanswered, the soul lives on, as a metaphor, if not as a metaphysical entity. When we speak of the soul, perhaps we're not referring to a separate immaterial being, but to the very essence of subjective experience. In the end, every individual lives the reality of their own consciousness as the most basic truth, and our inability to explain this experience keeps the soul an open-ended mystery, a question that refuses to fade. At the end of this documentary, one truth remains: the existence or immortality of the soul is still unresolved. But perhaps the true value lies not in the answer, but in the questions that keep us thinking. Consciousness, selfhood, death. Maybe living with these questions is what makes us human. Perhaps the soul is a phenomenon science has yet to understand. Or maybe the spark of meaning within us holds the universe's deepest secret. We don't know the answer, but the search goes on. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to support our work. Your curiosity keeps this exploration alive. See you in the next documentary.